So this week's video topic comes to us from some of our younger viewers out there who follow the channel, and it's about the topic of renting, more specifically, getting your first rental. So if that's you and you're looking into renting a property for the first time, then you understand how daunting and overwhelming this process can seem. So in today's video, I'm going to answer some of the most common questions that we here at the Vargas team receive when it comes to renting. And at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you what you should be doing to drastically increase the likelihood of renting a property and getting the landlord to give you the best possible terms. But before we do, help support the channel by clicking that thumbs up button, subscribing to the channel, and clicking that notification bell for more Miami real estate content. And with that said, let's dive into today's first question.
Awesome. So what should we as young adults know before starting to rent?
What should we as young adults know before starting to rent? Well, that it's not as complicated as it seems. Renting in general, it just means that you're leaving home for the first time and you're probably looking at a nice swanky apartment in downtown. Who uses the word swanky anymore? I don't know. But one of the things that I usually advise some of our clients is like understand, especially if this is your first rental, where you want to be. Do you want to be with roommates to save as much money as possible? Do you want to splurge on an apartment and then have maybe a cosigner? You know, everybody's life circumstances are going to be different, what they're getting for their first apartment. Some people lived at home, built out a career from their parents' home, and then are going into the city to rent their first property. So everyone's starting point is a little different. So I think understanding where your starting point is and having no pressure or shame or guilt about trying to get the nicest apartment for your first apartment or even your first rental, because let's face it, could be a townhome as well or a house, should not be the main component.
And what do you think can be a rule of thumb to be financially savvy as a young adult going into renting and going out there in the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a good rule of thumb, most financial, people, gurus who have you, would probably tell you that 25, maybe 30% of your income should go towards housing expenses. I would say that that's a good rule of thumb. Obviously, depending on who you ask, they're going to have different ideals regarding that and specifics and nuances. But 25 to 30% is a good rule of thumb of that. So when you go into the marketplace, you're really trying to stay within that budget. It's very easy to try to increase that budget and get to 40 to 50 or even more than 50%. I don't think it's good business practice and just good financial health for you, especially for your first rental, to be doing that. So if you're looking at apartments and you're saying, hey, Steven, that looks like it's impossible to do that because of the market, you may be having to look at different neighborhoods. You may have to look for getting a roommate to do that with you and split some of that cost in order to keep that expense ratio down. But I feel like if you're able to do under 30%, you should be in good shape.
And in regards to credit, if someone's asking you if my credit isn't the best, what options do they have?
Yeah, if you're going into the market for the first time and you don't have credit, it's going to be a uphill battle. That doesn't mean you can't get a rental. For sure, there's definitely landlords who will be able to understand your position. But providing landlords explanation, clarification, details, and definitely a backup is going to be your key components to getting this done. You have to put yourself in the landlord situation. If they're going to rent a property, they want to make sure that the likelihood of them collecting the rent from you is as high as possible. And the best way that they do that is credit. If they can do that, then rent confirmation and rent ledgers, basically showcasing that you've been paying rent or a mortgage where you are at for where you're currently living at, and you have a good history of payments. Now, you may be saying, this is my first apartment. I don't have any of that, Steven. So that may mean that you have to either put a higher deposit down as a security deposit. They may require that, or probably getting a cosigner to sign on your behalf and provide their credit. So either paying more money or getting a cosigner are going to be your two best ways to get out of it. There's some others, but I think those are probably the most prominent.
So with that being said, do you think that landlords can be a little bit flexible when it comes to credit maybe?
There is no rule of thumb in terms of credit. I've seen some people with very low credit scores, I don't even want to say how low, get accepted because some of the other things. The way I like to think about rentals, especially as a landlord myself, is whenever I look at a tenant, it's a combination of factors. Whoever tells you that just credit is the main factor, it doesn't really know what they're doing, to be honest. A lot of people have just accepted people on the basis of credit. And I could tell you from renting, 500 plus transactions, I've had some people with bad credit that pay great on time because other factors determine their ratio or their likelihood of paying. And I've had people with great credit not pay rent. It's very odd. Income, rent ledgers of where you're currently paying rent. You know, some people have bad credit because of a medical bill, a medical expense. It really wasn't necessarily anything about rent or housing that had to do with that. Higher savings accounts is a great indicator of somebody paying rent hard time, or rather their security of being able to continue to pay rent if they hit a hard time or something like that. So those other factors, evictions, background checks, reference checks, employment verification, all these other factors that we go into are a great indicator of whether the health of the tenant is going to be good and deemed acceptable by the landlord.
So it shouldn't be too much of a definitive factor for credit.
No, but I would say that a lot of landlords who may be new to landlording, or rather, being rental owners, put a lot of onus on the credit. And don't get me wrong, I do too. It's not. I'm not here to say that that's not something you should be putting, but I just understand that overall credit tells a part of the story and not the full story. So if you're able to provide, again, detailed reporting, clarification, and options and alternatives to the owner, and get out in front of it as a tenant, then more than likely you could probably find a landlord who's willing to accept some of those terms and qualifications.
Great. And another question that most young adults have is, does my background check hold a heavy role in getting accepted or declined? Yeah,
background holds a big role. It also depends on how recent, better yet, something happened. Evictions that people check for, they check for credit history, right? Collection reports, they check for criminal records. Those are usually like the background checks that most people are doing. There may be a few others, but for the majority, that's kind of the bulk of it. So it always depends on obviously what it is, how serious it can be. Some are more serious than others, obviously, as you guys know, and how recent it happened. So if this is something that's ongoing, very, very difficult. But we've had some people with certain situations in which their background, they've had certain, maybe a foreclosure 7, 8, 9 years ago. It's gonna not hold as much weight as it does today.
Right, okay. And how do I know I'm not getting robbed and paying more than I should? Because as a young adult, you might feel that you have less knowledge, so it can be scary going into it.
Yeah, if this is your first time getting a rental, then my best recommendation for you is get a real estate agent who has experience with rentals. There are definitely rental agents here at the Vargas team. We have a few rental agents that assist our clients with rentals. And so they specialize in the rental process, and they've done it hundreds of times. And that's the best indicator and way of you knowing that you're not getting, as you were saying, robbed or getting taken advantage of, or you're just getting the best deal possible. Some people just want to make sure that, hey, I want a solid, fair deal. Your real estate agent is going to be the first line of defense. If you don't have a real estate agent, then the onus is on you to understand comps, to understand market trends, to understand where the market is, where you could push, where you should negotiate, where you shouldn't negotiate, and what are the best possible terms for you to get. But if you don't understand what those terms even are, then you need to find somebody with the know-how and knowledge so that they can do that on your behalf. The best indicator in making sure is always the rental comps. What recently has rented in the building or neighborhood or area in which you're trying to rent in the last 30 to 60 days primarily. If you can't get that because there isn't anything, go up to 3 to 6 months, but usually 30 to 60 days. And then when you can find a similar property that's rented, you can compare what they're asking from you in terms of rent and see if it's a fair deal. That's the best way of doing that. And real estate agents are the ones that handle the comps, which is why I recommend getting a real estate agent.
Great. And what is included in rent, and what should I expect as a new tenant to pay out of pocket?
So what's included in rent is going to vary widely from one property to another. Here in Brickell, which is the majority of areas that we specialize in, are in luxury condominiums in the Brickell downtown Miami area, or rather Edgewater area. The majority of buildings will include water, trash, and sewer. Some buildings within that subset of buildings will also include basic cable and basic internet. It's not very likely that you're going to find a property in the downtown Brickell and Edgewater area that's going to include all of those. But for a good portion of them, water, trash, and sewer is something that's included. Now, when it comes to houses in Miami specifically, almost nothing is included. You may get lucky to have a landlord that takes care of the pool and the landscaping, but even that is not something that they take care of. So usually when you deal with houses or townhouses, you as the tenant are responsible for paying all of the utilities: water, electric, internet, cable, gas, if there is gas, because Miami doesn't really have a lot of gas, and then landscaping and pool. So pretty much the gamut of everything. And then when it comes to condos, the bare minimum is usually provided in the HOA fee.
Right. And I guess a follow-up question would be, how much do you think I should save for the cable if not included? Because some young adults, when they live with their parents, cables and internet is obviously covered and they don't have to worry about that. So going into getting your own cable, getting your own internet, how should that look like?
I would say Florida's pretty competitive when it comes to its utility cost. This is my conversations from people from different states and different cities. From what I've heard, the electric and water consumption and rates here in Florida are pretty affordable. Now, what I like to tell people, again, don't quote me on this because this can constantly be changing. If you're getting into a starter apartment, nothing too big, you're just paying your electric and you're just paying your cable, I would say budget $150 for those additional services monthly.
Right. Okay. And what happens if I break a lease term?
What happens if I break a lease term? It depends on the lease that you sign. Now, most leases in the state of Florida, I'm not an attorney, okay? So this is just from my experience, anecdotally speaking. Most leases from the state of Florida will require a 2-month early termination fee, which basically means that in order to break a lease, you have to pay 2 months worth of rent to the landlord to get out of the lease and basically eliminate any financial obligations and ties between you and the landlord. So that's best case scenario. There are other scenarios in which the lease will stipulate that you have to pay the entirety of what you have left of the lease. So if you break the lease 3 months into it, you got to pay the remaining 9 months. Of course, sometimes these things are negotiable. So if you are in a position where you need to break the lease, contact the listing agent, contact the owner and see if you could work out a deal, because most of the time landlords are not trying to screw you over. They want a fair deal. And then if you want to get out of it, you know, sometimes an agreement could easily be had.
In short, what is renter's insurance and is it even necessary for a new tenant?
Yes, absolutely necessary for new tenants. I can't tell you how many people need renter's insurance and sometimes they scoff at it. First, what is renter's insurance?
Right.
Basically, it's the coverage for your contents, your personal contents inside of the apartment, inside of your rental, essentially. So house, townhouse, it doesn't really matter. It's the personal stuff within the walls and under the roof of the property that are not covered by the owner's insurance. The owner's insurance is going to cover the exterior, perils, damage, wind, flood, all that good stuff. But anything gets damaged inside of the unit, it's not going to be covered. And if you're renting the property, the things that are going to get damaged are more than likely your stuff. So that coverage, which usually can range depending on what insurance provider you go with and depending on if you bulk it with other insurances that you already have, like your car insurance or what have you, could be a couple $100s a year. So it's a very nominal payment that you're paying your insurance provider to get about $100,000 worth of coverage for your contents, depending on, again, the actual policy that you're buying. But it's 100% worth it. Quick side note on this. I had a client who had recently at the SLS, very nice apartment in the heart of Brickell, 3 units above, there was a massive flood that came into her unit. Dang. Basically, the ceiling buckled. It broke, like the ceiling has started leaking everywhere. It damaged all her electronics, her TV, her bed, her mattress, her dresser. She had renter's insurance. They're cutting her a check for like $30-something thousand, and she's good. Had she not had that,
should have been screwed.
Yeah, the owner can't do anything about it. The other person who's responsible, yeah, maybe you could try to get something out of it, but we're still in that process. I mean, the guy hasn't answered me, so we probably need to get somebody else involved. Whatever. Get renter's insurance for sure.
Last but not least, how much would I need for a security deposit? First and last month's application fee. So
how much would you need for a security deposit? Well, look, most owners in Miami are going to require 3 months of rent to get into the unit. So that's most likely 70, 80% of the times first, last, and security. Security deposit is equal to 1 month's worth of rent. Hence why I'm saying it takes 3 months to get into a unit to pay to the owner, first, last, and security. There are some owners in which they like first and 2 security deposits. It's still the same 3 months, but you're breaking it down into 2 security deposits instead of 1. Basically break it down to 3 months. Now, additional to that, there are application fees that the owner and the building may charge you if it has an HOA. Those application fees are gonna range between $100 to $200 per person in Miami on average. There's definitely places that charge more, definitely places that charge less. And aside from that, there isn't really any other moving costs. A traditional rental in Miami will be first, last, and security. You pay your move-in fees, could be a couple $100 if it's just 1 or 2 people. And then your actual moving costs, getting a moving truck, getting movers. I can't quote you on any of that because that's gonna range a lot. 3 months bare minimum is what you need to get into the door. Cool.
Great.
All right. So I think those are all the questions. As I promised at the beginning of the video, I wanted to just give you a quick recap as to what you could do or what you should be doing to get your offer accepted. The first thing, as I mentioned, is that it seems like it's daunting. It seems like it's overwhelming. It really isn't. Get yourself a real estate agent that knows what they're doing. They can walk you through the steps and the process step by step so that you're aware. Now, I usually tell everybody that the main thing that you want to be doing is preparing to send an offer. When you do find a place, you're going to have to present to the owner why you as a tenant should be accepted to live into their property. The main way you do this is providing them financial documents to showcase your likelihood and approval of being able to pay the rent. So most owners are going to want a copy of your ID, a rental application. That rental application is like a resume. It basically talks about who you are, where you work, where you currently live, if you are currently paying rent, if you've ever been evicted, if you have a criminal record, what car you drive, do you have any pets, who are your references. It's a resume to the owner to understand who it is, who it is that they're going to be renting their property to. On top of that, you need your last 3 pay stubs. If you're at a job, you need to get or contact your employer, HR, and get your last 3 pay stubs. Sometimes you can pull that online. Those 3 pay stubs are going to showcase the owner how much you make per month, gross and net. Based on the gross and the net is what they're going to determine to see if you make enough income to move into the property. Good rule of thumb here in Miami is you want to make 3 times the amount of rent in your income. So if the rent's $2,000, you need to showcase to the owner $6,000 in income from your pay stubs to show that you qualify. Now, that could be broken into a roommate situation. So if you're rooming with somebody and the rent's $2,000 and you're going to split it, both of you guys combined need to showcase $6,000. So however you want to slice it, the total household income needs to be 3 times the amount of rent. And then I usually tell people you want a savings of about 4 to 5 months of rent in a savings account or in a bank account, liquid cash minimum. Because if you're going to pay 3 months to rent a place, you want to showcase the owner that you're not paying your last 3 months. You don't want to have 3 months and then have $0 left over after you move in, because the owner is going to say, well, what happens if you lose your job the week that you move in? What are you going to do? So by having some sort of reserves, it shows the owner that you're much more likely to continue to pay rent, even if you lose your job, even if you're in between jobs, you have a reserves account. Whenever you are able to meet a rental application, 3 months of income or 3 times the income, 3 or 4 months of the savings of the rent in a savings account, and you have good references, no criminal history, no evictions, and you have decent to good credit, you're pretty much a solid candidate for any single landlord. And you'd be hard pressed to find a landlord who wouldn't accept you. And now it just comes down if you want to pay the rent amount that they're asking for or not. And that I can't solve that question here. That's going to be a conversation you need to have with your real estate agent to run the comps, which goes back to Julian's question. How do I know I'm paying a fair deal? You have your real estate agent say, hey, I'm interested in this property. Can you send me the comps or the most recent rentals that were done in this area? And I want to see if they're asking $3,500. Has anybody paid anywhere near $3,500? And if so, I want to know. And that way I can determine if it's a good rental option or not. So your real estate agent can help you with that question. But I promise you guys, if you do the things that I'm talking about and you have your package, your rental package completed, ready to go, and you're able to showcase the owner why you're a solid tenant by showcasing your income, your savings, your credit, your rent application, and that you're clear of any credit or rather criminal checks or eviction, you're going to be fine. Right. And so it's just a matter of time. So guys, that's pretty much all that I have. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully you find value. A lot of people have these questions. So if you're interested in knowing more or want to see a home buying one, I think we should do a home buying one. Yeah. About what it is that you need to know
first time buyers
about buying a home for the first time, because maybe you rented already a few times
and now you're
ready to buy. Yeah. And now you have the same questions as you had when you started renting. Now you're like, well, what do I do when I buy?
Right.
We could do that. If you're interested in knowing more about that or you're interested in that video topic, comment the word home buying in the comment section below. Julian and I will be able to make sure that we look at it. And if there's enough interest, we'll make a video on it. And if you found a lot of value in today's video, then make sure to show support to the channel. Like, share, and subscribe the video. And with that said, guys, we'll see you on the next one. Take care and God bless.